Good afternoon on this Wednesday, the 11th of January. This is a 28storms.com update on Cyclone Heidi as it approaches Port Hedland and the rest of the Pilbara. The latest update from the Bureau of Meteorology is calling for a Category 2 landfall within the next 24 hours very close to Port Hedland, and this is the region where we can anticipate some of the highest recorded wind gusts, and this is still not forecast to be a very significant cyclone in terms of the overall wind threat, but this system very well could easily begin to blow around some of the loose items, so go ahead and prepare for that possibility. But the much more greater threat remains to be the heavy rainfall along with the risk of flooding, and this risk is going to extend well toward the south and beyond the coastline. Just to reiterate, this is not going to be a severe cyclone in terms of the overall threat of wind damage. This is the latest update from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, and they are only forecasting the storm to intensify to a peak intensity of 45 knots, which would make this nothing more than a tropical storm based on Northern Hemisphere standards. And also the good news is that there is some fairly good track agreement. As we can see, the JTWC is also taking the center near the coastline toward Port Hedland. There was some question over the past day or so as to whether or not this developing tropical low would have enough time to develop before making landfall across Western Australia, but there's really no debate about it. The latest visible shows a well-organized developing tropical storm, and the only good news is that the system will be pushing inland within the next 24 hours, so the time available for this system to continue to intensify is highly limited. Furthermore, we can quite easily make out the center of circulation on the latest microwave satellite imagery, but the overall trend appears to be that the dry air from the western half of the storm is trying to work into the inner core, and that could also limit development over the next 12 to 18 hours. And another sign of that is from what we are seeing on the enhanced infrared satellite imagery. Some of the colder cloud tops are beginning to warm as the center approaches the coastline, so the storm has more than likely peaked in intensity. You can also see the dry air beginning to wrap into the inner core of the storm on the latest precipitable water analysis. We can see that dry air beginning to funnel in from the Indian Ocean, and toward the very end it's still continuing to wrap around that center. All that being said, though, the upper level winds are relatively favorable. We have very light upper level wind shear, and that is thanks to the presence of an upper level ridge located directly over the tropical cyclone, and the vertical shear profiles are generally below 5 knots. Now, toward the south, we still have this very strong jet, but this is really not going to act to disrupt the cyclone until it pushes well into Western Australia. So the bottom line is that the storm does still have a narrow window to possibly strengthen just a little bit more, but even if the storm fails to intensify beyond the current strength, we still have this very strong band of heavy rainfall and precipitation headed straight for the Pilbara coast. In fact, the latest Western Australia radar mosaic, courtesy of the weatherchaser.com, already shows a series of bands impacting much of the coastline, and the center of circulation is also coming into view. And as we switch over to the more zoomed in Port Hedland radar, we already see this very significant band, and this is when the winds are really going to begin to increase once this band reaches Port Hedland. And as we turn to the nearest surface observation near the center of the cyclone, this is looking off toward the island northeast of Port Hedland, where the maximum sustained wind speeds have been over 40 knots at times here. And as the center of Heidi approaches, the pressure is now down to 1,000 hectopascals. And as of right now, the winds are not quite as strong here in Port Hedland, but they are sure to begin rising here over the next 6 to 12 hours. This is the latest 3-day accumulated precipitation forecast from the GFS model, and the GFS continues to indicate that there is a chance of some extreme isolated totals exceeding 140 to 150 millimeters, and there's a large swath that's going to easily have over 100 millimeters of total precipitation. Also keep in mind that some of the higher totals are actually expected to be well away from the coastline. Elsewhere, there's really not much action besides Cyclone Heidi at the moment, which is certainly some good news, and the latest forecast from the ECMWF model keeps much of the tropics relatively quiet over the next 5 days, and it's really not until you go into days 7 through 10 that it begins to develop a broad area of low pressure out here, so that area will begin to be monitored in future model guidance. So just to recap, all interests along the Pilbara coast are just advised to hunker down over the next 24 hours, and otherwise, as long as you stay away from any low-lying areas, you should make it through this storm in relatively good shape. But that is all for now. Keep it tuned to 28storms.com/cyclone for more cyclone updates throughout the remainder of cyclone season.